So he actually stuck around for game time. And one of our pastors was then following up with him, who came over and said, hey, what's going on with the ride home? He goes, I texted my parents. They're going to come and get me, but it's going to be like 15 minutes. He goes, no problem. We'll be cleaning up for the next hour, so don't worry about it. Just hang out. He goes, and the pastor said to the boy, he goes, by the way, what'd you think? He goes, I'm not a Christian, but I kind of want to know more about this. And so the pastor said, wait, do you want to become a Christian? Or you want to know more? And he said, no, I'm not ready to become a Christian yet, but I want to know more. For 20 minutes, that pastor leader got to sit with that boy and share with him the gospel of Jesus Christ and how Jesus loves him, how Jesus wants him in the family, how Jesus died for him and what form of death, and about the resurrection and the form of resurrection, and what the job of the church is, and how to be saved, and how it's something you can't earn. He got to do this over a 15-minute period. At the end of that period of time, he said to the boy, do you want to be saved? The boy said, this is something I really need to think about. And he said, okay, can I show you how to pray about it? He said, well, I'm not saved yet. He goes, nope, but God will hear your prayers. I should follow up and see what happened to that young man, because I know he came back to group. See, God can use any circumstance that seems bad for good. Praise be his. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Because we believe, we speak. Because he first loved us, we speak his word, and we walk in the path of Jesus to make disciples of all nations. So we all speak again together, courtesy of God. May his peace, which transcends all understanding, rest upon you and your families. On behalf of Randy and AFR, I'm Todd Herman, and this has been A Disciple's View.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
If God could speak, what would he say?
The Bible subjects itself to historical verification.
He says, we saw this.
We go to the Bible wanting to hear what the living God has to say to us.
When God speaks, what does he say?
The God who speaks. Visit stream.afa.net. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Investigations continue into last weekend's terrorist attack against a Jewish group in Boulder, Colorado. Now, the attacker's family is being subject to deportation. Eben Brown with more.
45-year-old Egyptian national Mohammed Sabri Soliman remains in custody, facing both Colorado state and federal charges for allegedly injuring 12 people, part of a Jewish group in Boulder, Colorado, marching in support of hostages still held by Hamas. Soliman had overstayed his visa, and now his wife and children are being held on immigration matters.
But we're also investigating to what extent his family knew about this horrific attack, if they had any knowledge of it, or if they provided support to it.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Soliman is facing hundreds of years in prison. Eben Brown, Fox News.
In the aftermath of that terrorist attack, Border Czar Tom Homan is sounding the alarm over getaways, or illegals who entered the United States without being processed by Border Patrol agents. He has a question for lawmakers who criticize the Trump administration's deportation policy.
For the congressmen and senators who are saying we're traumatizing aliens, we're terrorizing aliens, have you ever met with angel moms and dad who buried their children at the hands because an illegal alien killed their children?
The Justice Department has announced that 2 Chinese nationals have been charged with smuggling a dangerous biological pathogen into the U.S. Rich Edson tells us more from Washington.
The FBI says this is a reminder of how the Chinese government is looking to target American vulnerabilities. The Justice Department says it has charged Yongqing Jian and Zhengyang Liu, both Chinese citizens, with conspiracy, smuggling goods into the United States, false statements, and visa fraud. Prosecutors claim Liu flew from China to Detroit in July of 2024 and stashed a dangerous pathogen in his backpack. They say Customs and Border Protection found a wad of tissues crumpled up with a note in Chinese, a round piece of filtered paper with circles drawn on it, and 4 clear plastic baggies with small clumps of plant material inside.
The Department of Justice launching a probe into the Biden administration's handling of the former president's cognitive decline. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer of Kentucky says he expects those they requested interviews with, including Biden's former White House doctor, to come in for transcribed interviews.
We've notified them. They know they're coming in. Anyone who is involved in the White House is going to be asked to come in, whether that's high-level staffers, cabinet secretaries, or even family members, whoever was involved in the process as we bring in these lower-level staffers.
A manhunt continues for a Washington state father after the bodies of his 3 young daughters were found on Monday.
Police in Wenatchee, Washington say they're looking for 32-year-old Travis Decker, who is wanted for 3 counts of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. His 3 daughters, aged 5, 8, and 9, were reported missing on Friday night after their mother said Decker had not returned them from a planned visitation. Their bodies were found in his truck at a campsite. Chelan County Sheriff Mike Morrison said officers won't rest until Decker is brought to justice.
We suffer as a community. It has hit many of us hard. Going on 20 years, I don't think I've had a situation that has really almost prompted tears to come up.
Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
Illinois will not move toward the legalization of prostitution or psychedelic drugs, at least not for now.
David E. Smith of Illinois Family Institute says both measures have stalled.
One was the legalization of prostitution in the state of Illinois. They call it legalizing sex workers. We know that's just a sanitized version of prostitution. The other one is the legalization of psychedelic drugs.
Smith says it was just a few years ago that Illinois decided to legalize recreational marijuana, and the result has not been good.
In the years since then, we've learned that daily use of marijuana throughout the nation has now exceeded the daily use of alcohol. So we've got people on our streets, in our communities, who are now inebriated. This is the last thing we need to do, is to send a message to our culture that marijuana is recreational and magic mushrooms are good for you too.
Earlier this week, it was learned that a bill threatening homeschool freedom in Illinois failed to advance. The same goes for another bill that would have allowed assisted suicide. I'm Chris Woodward.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty P.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildmon and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core. Glad to be with you on this live edition of the program. And it's been a while. Probably one of my longest stints away from live radio in several years, Bobby. I'm not going to say the entirety of my career here, which is 10 years, because I haven't done radio the entire time I've been here.
Well,
but since The Core began, I don't think I've been gone that long.
No.
2 weeks.
Just, yeah.
2 weeks.
A year. That's it.
A year. It felt like a year, but I planned on doing the show Monday, and then life happens, and so we had to drop in a re-air. But here I am live.
We're coming up on our 4-year anniversary too.
Is that right?
July 12th.
Nice.
Yeah.
we're
It's
also
a weekend, so we can't celebrate.
I think we're also coming up on the 249th birthday of America, right? Because next year's 250.
Correct, 250 next year.
Yeah. So this July will be 249. A lot of things happening. All right, let's turn our attention to the scripture, and then we'll have a guest on to talk about some ongoings in Washington, D.C. Proverbs chapter 12. Listen to this. And if you're never taken aback, or if you're never humbled by scripture, well, you're either not a believer and don't have the Holy Spirit, or you're not reading it enough. One of the two. But this ought to shock everyone, or at least wake everyone up to the reality of God's truth. Here's Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. A good man will obtain favor from the Lord, but he will condemn a man who devises evil. That's verses 1 and 2 in Proverbs chapter 12. And if you just got your feeling hurt because I said stupid, well, it wasn't me. I'm reading from the Bible. Okay, so this is Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, the latter part of verse 1, but he who hates reproof is stupid. All right? And then the first part of that is whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. So it is important to God that we be open to discipline, that we be receptive to discipline. That is critical for the sanctification of the believer. If you are not willing to be disciplined or willing to be corrected and to turn from your sin, that runs counter to Scripture, and it runs counter to the life of a believer. And so true maturity and true obedience to God is being receptive and obedient to his correction in our lives. That's Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And through that, we receive knowledge, we receive wisdom. All right, let's turn to our guest for this segment, talking about a familiar topic that we've talked about in recent weeks, and that is the massive amount of money that the federal government sends to abortion providers that are providing abortions all around the country, in states all around the country. Kelsey Pritchard's with us. She's State Public Affairs Director for the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America organization. Kelsey, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Walker.
Well, Kelsey, I was pleasantly surprised, in a good way, that the House reconciliation bill that made its way over to the Senate in recent days and weeks had a provision in it that defunded abortion providers, meaning any organization that provides abortions doesn't qualify for federal money. Now, some people may be saying, well, I didn't think abortion providers could get federal money anyway, or currently. Well, there's a caveat to that, is current law says, well, you can't use the money to cover abortions, but we still can send money for other related procedures surrounding the issue of abortion. So am I on the right track? What have I missed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we do have the Hyde Amendment, which when President Trump entered office again, he reinstated. And that Hyde Amendment says that you can't use American taxpayer dollars to directly pay for someone's abortion. But the abortion industry has long had this workaround since the 1970s where they've been able to get Medicaid dollars. And so Planned Parenthood, for instance, gets about $529 million annually just in Medicaid funding. And that's the lion's share of the public funding that they get. So really what we're doing is we're propping them up and we're subsidizing the number one cause of death in this country. Taxpayers have been forced to do this for decades, and now's the time to finally end this.
Let me ask you this, Kelsey. This legislation is it's pretty big piece of legislation, and it's hard to get. And maybe I should read the bill, but it's several hundred pages, and I have other things to do. But does this bill actually block Planned Parenthood from receiving federal dollars, or is it just a reinstitution of the Hyde Amendment? Because I've been confused on how far this legislation actually goes.
So this provision in the budget bill only covers Medicaid funding. So if they get about $800 million annually, this would address $529 million that they get. So
that's a big deal, Kelsey. And I don't want to dismiss what the conservatives and Republicans are trying to do here, along with the president. That's a lot of money. I mean, so this provision targets the Medicaid reimbursements, and this provision would it basically states that if you're providing abortions, you don't qualify for Medicaid reimbursements. Is that correct?
Exactly. So it's not just for Planned Parenthood; it's for any abortion business. You're no longer able to get our Medicaid money.
Yeah, this is a big deal, folks, and this is I'm not going to say a first ever, but it's monumental to get this provision in the legislation through the House of Representatives. Was a big hurdle to cross. Let me ask you this, Kelsey. Once again, we're talking to Kelsey Pritchard with the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Do you think, what's the appetite in the Senate? Because clearly there's several Republican senators that don't believe the same that you and I do on the issue of life. And there's Collins and there's Murkowski, maybe a couple others, and they're always coming to the defense of abortion. It's sickening, actually, that they run as Republicans, but then they're very pro-abortion. What's the appetite in the Senate for this provision?
Yeah, so our group has been lobbying on this front since March, and overall, I'd say what we've heard from the GOP has been encouraging, and a lot of them are fired up to get this done. We saw that on the House side with the Speaker's leadership to get this through and to keep this in the bill. And Senator Thune, Leader Thune, is also really wanting to get this through in the bill. So that is good and encouraging, and just the overall positive response we've seen is very good, just in light of, if you think of the Dobbs decision, how some Republicans have not been as bold on the issue of abortion as they should be, since people can now have a say on the issue of abortion through their federal and state representatives. So the fact that we have seen such a groundswell of support for this amongst Republicans, that gives us optimism and hope we can get this done. Of course, you always have your usual suspects. The good news is we can afford to lose one or two in the Senate. And they're not just voting on this, right? They're voting on the one big, beautiful bill. And we know how Trump wants to get this through the Senate soon and how much they're working and pushing to get this done.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, I'm optimistic this gets through the Senate. Just looking at it from afar, I think it would, because I just don't think there's enough pro-abortion Republicans in the Senate to halt this provision in the bill. But forcing the issue with the senators in and of itself, making them vote on this, to me, is at least an incremental victory here. Because what often happens is these lawmakers that are, wishy-washy, and we don't know where they stand, or they stand on the wrong side unless it's an election season, and then all of a sudden they become very conservative. This puts them on the record of answering the question, are you okay with federal dollars going to abortion providers? And forces them to take a position on that issue, Kelsey. So I think all in all, just having this discussion and getting it in front of the Senate in and of itself is some sort of a victory here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this would really be the biggest victory since the Dobbs decision, and we had a ton of states enact pro-life laws. This would be huge for the pro-life movement. It's really the next big step in the long-term effort to finally end abortion someday. And so we look at the money that President Trump cut off from Planned Parenthood, at least temporarily. He froze some Title X funding because of DEI reasons to Planned Parenthood. And since then, we've seen a number of Planned Parenthoods that have closed because of that, or have said that they will close. And that's like, $20-some million. We're talking about $529 million. And Planned Parenthood says they're going to close 200 facilities if this gets through in the one big beautiful bill. So this is huge. This could really be the blow to take down Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Kelsey, tell us where more about your website and how we can read more about the work of your group.
Yeah, go to sbaprolife.org. You can check us out there. You can also read the latest news on the defunding effort and all other things that we're working on in the pro-life movement. We also have a podcast called Abortion Exposed in America, and you can check that out. We've got a season out now exposing some things in Planned Parenthood.
Excellent. Kelsey Pritchard, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. God bless.
Absolutely. Well, another option here that I want to float this out there because we need to be thinking about multiple avenues here for clawing back funding of abortion providers. And I say abortion providers because, folks, I don't personally don't like singling out Planned Parenthood. Yes, they're the big bad actor. They're the largest abortion provider in the country. I get it. But I don't like giving the left fodder to make it look like we're just targeting one entity, okay? Because they can do a rebrand tomorrow, and then all of a sudden it's not Planned Parenthood anymore, it's some other entity, and we're having to recreate all of the messaging on this, okay? So it's abortion providers, any entity that provides abortions. Another route that the Trump administration needs to look at, if they haven't already, is I think that Medicaid, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that is a federal government entity under HHS, I think there needs to be a federal investigation into how the Medicaid reimbursements have been distributed to abortion providers, and is any of that money violating the Hyde Amendment? Because the line here is very thin, okay? What I'm talking about is the money that goes to quote-unquote non-abortion services through abortion providers, and then the abortion services and how that billing works. There is some I can almost guarantee you some serious overlap here. And there's probably violations of the Hyde Amendment. If this were to be looked into and investigated, then I would almost guarantee you're going to find that they have not been abiding by the Hyde Amendment. Or if they have, they've been using loopholes. And this is all under President Trump's authority. And this is under the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They're the ones that facilitate Medicaid with the states. They have the authority to investigate. It's not criminal, at least the evidence doesn't suggest that right now. So this isn't probably a DOJ thing. This is probably a Medicaid thing that needs to be investigated. And what you'll find, and this report could be very helpful in shifting public perception here, but if you find that without the federal government subsidizing of abortion providers through Medicaid reimbursements, there is no mega Planned Parenthood. Well, we're de facto subsidizing and supporting abortion despite the Hyde Amendment. That's the problem here, is we're propping up the abortion providers. We'll be back.
David, the son of Jesse, just an ordinary giant slayer. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. David's battle with Goliath is an epic drama where the little boy stands in God's power to conquer the Philistine giant. David didn't awaken that morning expecting to slay a giant. He didn't stroll in with an entourage after a rugged mountain range training camp like Rocky and Rocky IV. He was just a regular kid bringing his brother's lunch, but fully confident in God's immeasurable power. Though he saw Goliath, David never acknowledged him as a giant, saying, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who dared defy the Lord of hosts?" When regular people are fully persuaded, fully confident in God's power, giants fall.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
Jesus' final words to his disciples were to go into all the world and teach the gospel, making disciples of all nations. For more than 27 years, Tomorrow Clubs International has faithfully answered that call by partnering with local churches in some of the world's poorest nations. Here's a report from a team leader.
When children learn to follow Jesus, they become disciple makers, influencing their families and friends. The gospel then overflows into the community, bringing repentance, reconciliation, church growth, and even reduction in crime and substance abuse.
More than 500,000 children have learned to follow Jesus through Tomorrow Clubs. Kids also learn practical life skills such as cooking, woodworking, and the English language, preparing them for a brighter future. To learn more about the life-changing work of Tomorrow Clubs International, go to tomorrowclubs.org. That's tomorrowclubs.org. All gifts are tax deductible.
We're going to be going back to the Holy Land in March of 2026. Hello, I'm Tim Wildmon, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We've got trips planned to the Holy Land and also to Greece on a tour we call the Footsteps of Paul. Both of those are in March of 2026. You can do both, or you can do one or the other. You can find out all the information by going to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com, and check out the itinerary, the costs, and everything. We're going to be going to the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, the holy city of Jerusalem. We're going to Bethlehem. There's just so much to see in Israel. And then in Greece, it's tracking the footsteps of St. Paul. So again, for more information on these March 2026 tours, go to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com.
At the Core podcasts are available at AFR.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Core. Last segment we had on Kelsey Pritchard with Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, talking about defunding abortion providers. And of course, the big bad actor there is Planned Parenthood. Most people know about them. But there's others as well, abortion providers, some more regional or state abortion providers that are receiving federal money as well. And so this is going to be an interesting test in the Senate to see if this will hold in the legislation. And we're actually going to talk pretty extensively here in a few minutes on this legislation, on the growing debt, and what to do with the debt and with the spending and the tax cuts coming up that's in the Senate right now. Before I do that, I want to mention a few events. Our Activate Summit's next week. And of course, registration is closed. So we look forward to seeing everyone there that has registered, and we'll be there next week at the Activate Summit. We'll be looking forward to seeing you. A couple more events. We do have the AFA at the Ark coming up at the end of October. We're not full, but we're getting close. We're getting pretty close. So if you wait probably more than a couple more weeks, you're going to miss that window of opportunity there for the Ark encounter. And the Creation Museum will have some special sessions back at the hotel as well during that time. That's late October, the 30th and the 31st. The Weekend with AFA, this is going to be our first ever Weekend with AFA here in our town of our national headquarters, Tupelo, Mississippi, October 2nd through the 4th. That's the 1st of October, Weekend with AFA. We're going to have some pretty good speakers coming in. Jerry Boyer with Boyer Research. Jerry's been on my show a couple of times. He and I work together on shareholder engagement. He'll be here with us. We'll have Tim Barton, Jenna Ellis, and others coming to visit with us in Tupelo with a Weekend with AFA. And both of those events, you can find more over at afa.net/events, afa.net/events. The last thing I want to mention before we jump back into the news is our 10 Commandments Speech Challenge. I did tease this a little bit in recent weeks, and we're going to have on Pastor Joseph Parker on Friday to talk about this extensively. But this is a great challenge for young people, for students to participate in, and we'll send some happies as well for just participation. And then, of course, we've got some pretty big gifts that we're going to give for those who actually win the challenge. But this is specifically for children and youth age 7 to 17. They are being asked to write and present on video a 3 to 5 minute speech on the topic of the first commandment. What is the first commandment? You shall have no other gods before me. Participants may receive assistance from a parent or a sibling to write, record, and submit the speech, so must make it a family project, and speeches must be submitted by the end of June. June 30th is the cutoff for this challenge. Anyone who participates, they'll get a 10 Commandments t-shirt, bookmark, and a coupon code for the AFA Resource Center. So we look forward to all the folks that are going to participate in that. Just simply go to afr.net/10 commandments. 10 is spelled out. afr.net/10 commandments. All right. The one big beautiful bill. That's what President Trump's been calling it. And I got to give it to him from a marketing standpoint. It works pretty good. And that's what everybody else is calling it. So he made a good move on the branding for the legislation. In technical terms, it's a budget reconciliation package. It can be done once a year, and all it needs is a simple majority to vote to pass in the House and the Senate. That's what makes it attractive for the ruling party, is that they don't need the other party to vote for it. This is a Republican-only bill, if you will. And so it's passed the House, and there's a lot going on here, okay? But let me just give you some highlights of what's in the legislation. There is funding for enhanced border security, including the wall, all right? That's in the legislation. There is the president's tax cuts, the president's renewal of his tax cuts from 2017, and a couple of the smaller provisions as well. But the problem that people are having with this is really on the spending side, all right? There's not any Republicans that I'm reading that have any problem with funding the border or funding border security or renewing the tax cuts. That there's pretty much zero opposition to that. Where the concerns begin to arise is with the spending levels, all right? And remember, President Trump was elected partially because of the promise to cut spending. Now, let's give a caveat here, in all honesty. President Trump is not a Tea Party conservative. He never has claimed to be, okay? So President Trump is not Rand Paul. President Trump is not Thomas Massey from a fiscal worldview standpoint, all right? So it's not as if President Trump is not doing what he said he would do or, misled the voters or isn't keeping his campaign promise. President Trump has, even in his last term, he was a spender, right? Now he thinks we don't need to spend money in certain areas, but like the Green New Deal, but instead we'll spend it somewhere else, all right? So that needs to be stated because, in all fairness, that needs to be stated. The problem is it doesn't matter whether President Trump wants spending cuts or not. We have to have them, all right? This is purely a national interest thing. And I think President Trump would agree that this debt is unsustainable. And he said as such during the campaign. He's probably said as such since he's been sworn in. The debt and deficit levels are simply unsustainable. And that's not a partisan thing. This is not a you got to be an economist to figure this out thing. This is like economics 101. The level of debt that we're in as a nation and the level of deficit that we are operating under is unsustainable. And nobody can dispute that, all right? Now, here's where disagreement comes. What does unsustainable mean, right? Does that mean that it's going to be apocalyptic and next year we're going to be in a Great Depression? What exactly does it mean to say that this level of debt is unsustainable? Well, I can't answer that in honesty, exactly how this plays out. But what I can say with confidence is it's not going to play out good. All right. And I can give you kind of an extreme example, and then I can give you a more subtle example of how this plays out. But either way, it's not good. Okay, either way, it's not good. All right, here's the extreme, and then I'll give you the subtle, and then we'll shift to some clips and talk about the specifics of the legislation. The extreme case is what you hear from your Ray Dalios and others that predict some sort of economic calamity. All right. And Ray Dalio, he goes back and forth on how apocalyptic it is. But others, the end of the world, Great Depression, we're going to be all eating rice and beans in food lines. America's not the reserve currency. You get the point. And we all, stock market dropped 70%, and we're all on unemployment, and we have to rebuild. All right, that's kind of the apocalyptic viewpoint. This is kind of the prepper viewpoint, right? Let me stash up my gold bars, food and water, self-sufficiency. That's kind of the mindset there. That's the worst case scenario play out of the continuing down this path of debt. And I don't personally think it will get there. I think the downward spiral is going to look a little bit different. It's going to be a little more subtle. But when we get to the other side of it, we're all going to look back going, that was terrible. What were we thinking? Why didn't we do anything? This is a disaster, okay? The more subtle likely scenario, once again, this is purely my opinion, is this slow but steady degrading of the middle class. And this isn't theory, like the apocalyptic scenario is theory. This right here that I'm talking about is actually happening now. All right, so this isn't what I think might happen in the future. This is what's happening and has been happening over the last 3 to 5 years at a rapid pace. Really has been happening over the last 20 years at a more slow pace. And that is the deterioration of the middle class. And if you want to look somewhere to figure out, well, what's this look like? California, all right? California is the state of the haves and the have-nots, all right? You go to California, and by and large, it doesn't have a middle class. Now, that's not technically true. They have a middle class, but the middle class is shrinking, okay? And the point is that the upper class and the wealthy, the so-called wealthy, I know that's subjective, but the people in the upper percentile of income, they begin accumulating a lot of the wealth, and then the people in the middle and the lower income become poorer and poorer. All right. That's how it works. That's how California is today. Obviously, that's not good because you've got a massive segment of your population that is becoming worse off and worse off and worse off. And I think that's the likely scenario. And you see that with inflation. With inflation, your average person's dollar that they earn working becomes less and less valuable. You can do less and less with it. The higher income class of people, the upper percentile, they've got the whole system figured out. And this is not a bash the wealthy, being rich is evil. This is not a socialist type viewpoint that I'm expressing here. I'm just telling you this is how it works, okay? This is how the world works. The wealthier or the upper class of our income society, they have a way more complex financial apparatus. All right, they're invested in hard assets that appreciate, i.e., real estate, and maybe gold and other things that over time just naturally appreciate. They don't lose value. And then they're in the markets, they're in equities, they're in bonds, they've got savings, they've got high yield savings account, they have multiple homes, so they've got a lot of assets that have appreciated. They probably have some of it paid off. And so when you add all that together, they're not going to be suffering here with this high debt, rising inflation, chipping away at the middle class, making the dollar less powerful. The upper to middle class, or the upper class rather, they're not the ones you need to worry about here in this rising debt, rising deficit, out of control inflation scenario. It's the middle and lower class that don't have the same financial circumstances as someone who's in the upper percentile. Once again, this is not a bashing of the wealthy or anything like that, or rich people are evil. That's the Bernie Sanders garbage. I'm just telling you, this is how the economy works. And so when you have this high inflation, high debt, harder to make your dollar stretch economy, it simply hurts the middle and lower class more. And generally speaking, especially your lower income people, they're not going to have a bunch of hard assets that appreciate. They're not going to have, 3 residences, rental property. They're not going to have a sophisticated portfolio of stocks and bonds and, passive income. They're just not set up for that. They just don't have the ability to do that. All right. They're just figuring out how they're going to pay their bills next week. And so what we need and what we've had historically in this country is an economy that works for everybody. We've had an economy that works for everyone. Everyone through hard work has the ability to earn a decent income and to, over time, build wealth, and then, Lord willing, pass generational wealth on to their children and their grandchildren. But this out of control Washington, D.C. spending spree that we've been on the last 30 years, 20 to 30 years, is making it harder to achieve that American dream that we've been known for around the world. All right. So I just gave you pretty much a 10-minute layperson's perspective as to why the spending levels that we're currently doing is unsustainable and why it's bad for the country. Because it's bad for the middle class and it's bad for the lower class. And it deteriorates individual wealth, especially in the middle and the lower class. That's why there are senators and congressmen that have serious issues with this budget reconciliation package, i.e. the one big beautiful bill. And where I said I was going to get to clips, we'll get to them in the next segment. But now there's some people in Congress that, whether it's Thomas Massie or Rand Paul, that you look at and you go, they're kind of opposed to everything. Every time that Congress wants to do something, they're a no vote. And so I just think they're just blowing steam. But I wouldn't discount these arguments just I wouldn't blanket dismiss these arguments that Rand Paul and others are bringing forth, because there's others in the Senate and the House that have the same concerns that are not blowing smoke. And they're not grandstanders, and they're usually willing to negotiate. And we're going to play Senator Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, and others have serious concerns about this legislation and the spending levels. And so something's going to have to be done. I think it's almost certain that some legislation is going to get through. I mean, the tax cuts are going to have to be extended. We can't go with a massive tax hike in this situation that we're in economically. But what passes the Senate and the House is still up for debate. We'll talk more in the next segment.
The loss of a child through abortion, miscarriage, or stillbirth affects the emotional health of families. Feelings of anger, sadness, and regret can be overwhelming. There is hope and healing in the aftermath of a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline at 866-482-LIFE to talk with someone who has been where you are and healed to help others. Your call is confidential. 866-482-LIFE.
Some would say truth is relative, and to the world, that's right. What the world considers to be truth fluctuates depending on the narrative they're trying to promote. Of course, we know truth is found in Scripture, and it never changes. The documentary, The God Who Speaks, proves the Bible's reliability as the source of real truth and reinforces our belief in it as our firm foundation. Watch it anytime at stream.afa.net. That's stream.afa.net.
Without even seeing them show up, I could feel like the darkness.
Jamie Sanchez is another Christian business proprietor who has been targeted for his faith. His Drip Cafe was opened to serve and help the homeless of downtown Denver.
We believe sex outside of marriage and homosexuality is a sin in God's eyes. And the enemy and his minions decided to use that as a platform.
Jesus told us persecution would come.
I would see them, just the rage and the hate. I pictured them doing that at the foot of the cross to Jesus. And I just remembered what he said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And so I had to position my heart that way.
The Jamie Sanchez story is one of the videos of the Impact series at stream.afa.net.
It's been a crazy, crazy ride.
See Jamie's story and much more at stream.afa.net.
This is the Lost in Translation Ministry Minute. Here now is your host, Dr. Baruch Korman.
Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, this word poor can be also those who are afflicted, who are troubled spiritually. In other words, they are not content, they are not pleased with the spiritual condition of the world. They understand that a change is necessary. So Messiah says, blessed are the poor in spirit, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the very first beatitude that we study, we see that statement of the kingdom of heaven.
Learn more about the teaching ministry of Dr. Baruch Korman at loveisrael.org. You'll find videos on almost any biblical topic on his YouTube page and on the My Bible Study app. That's loveisrael.org.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us on the show. Let's jump back into this legislation, as President Trump calls it, the one big beautiful bill. I was actually surprised how quickly this thing came to a halt in the Senate. And what I'm talking about is the Senate told us, they told the public a couple months ago that when beginning these discussions, that passing one bill is going to be challenging, if not near impossible, in the Senate. Now, they have all the reasons of which I can't even articulate, but the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, they called this. They predicted it. They said one bill is not going to work. We need multiple bills. Why and how, I have no idea. The rules in the Senate and in Congress are just overly complicated. It's like our tax code. It's unnecessarily complicated. And some of it I don't get. So I'm not even going to try to go into explaining it. Part of it, I know for sure, is getting consensus. All right. And when you do multiple pieces of legislation, you can quickly build consensus around one or two pieces of legislation as opposed to bundling it all in one bill, and then everybody's got problems with it. And then the whole thing comes to a screeching halt, which is what's happening now. And so this bill is facing some serious pushback in the Senate, which is not what President Trump wants to hear. It's not what the White House wants to hear, but that's what's happening. And Senator Ron Johnson went on about a minute spiel on some of the main issues with this legislation. So this was on CNBC Squawk Box, talking about what Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin calls a grotesque bill. Let's listen to his assessment here.
So the president and Senate leadership has to understand that we're serious. They all say, "Oh, we can pressure these guys." No, you can't. Okay, again, we're being very respectful. I ran in 2010 as part of the Tea Party movement. We were mortgaging our children's future. We were $14 trillion in debt then. Now we're over $37 trillion. We're serious about this. They need to take us seriously. Don't insult us. Work with us. Lay out the numbers. If you can say that our numbers are wrong, fine. Let's work through it. But again, every analysis I have, there's greater upside risk to that deficit. Interest rates are moving up. If we go increase interest rates 1%, that's another $4 trillion over 10 years in terms of deficit. If we don't replace the $4 trillion, that's $4 trillion of lost revenue. Again, and growing the economy 3%, it adds to it a little bit, but mostly in the out years. So again, come to the table. Let's look at the numbers. If I'm wrong, prove that I'm wrong. But let's do it with respect, but mainly respect for our children and grandchildren. This is immoral, what us old farts are doing to our young people. This is grotesque what we're doing. We need to own up to that. This is our moment. I can't accept this scenario. I can't accept it, so I won't vote for it unless we are serious about fixing it.
All right, I'm with Ron Johnson. Okay, I haven't really came down on either side of this legislation because, as my buddy Rick Green said when we hosted a couple weeks ago, let's kind of withhold judgment here. Let's give President Trump the benefit of the doubt. And here, and this is, folks, I just want to be clear. I'm not excusing President Trump or the White House on this, because at the end of the day, they were the brainchild behind it. But the way Washington works is what led us here. The way Congress works is what led us here. But let me stay focused. Senator Ron Johnson is right, okay? Once again, I think that the tax cuts are going to have to be extended. I'm in favor of that. I think some bill is going to have to pass. I think the border security is important. I think a lot of this is important. We just talked about defunding abortion providers. I think that's important. Here's where the White House is wrong. The White House is wrong because under the best case scenario, spending is reduced by $1.5 trillion. Okay? Let's just round up $2 trillion. Over 10 years. Once again, under a best case scenario, according to the White House's own numbers, spending is reduced by $2 trillion, and I'm way rounding up here. Over 10 years. It's really 1.5 trillion. $2 trillion over the course of 10 years. All right. Two assumptions here. The first assumption is that Republicans keep the White House and both chambers of Congress for 10 years. All right. That's a big assumption. This spending package, the numbers associated with the spending projections here and the cuts operates under the assumption that Republicans retain control of the White House and both chambers of Congress for the next 10 years. And I know many of you are laughing right now. It ain't going to happen. All right. I hope it happens. It's not going to happen. Not the trifecta. Okay. We might can keep the White House, maybe the Senate, back and forth. You're not going to keep the trifecta. I'm not sure that's actually ever happened in our history, where one party keeps the trifecta for 10 years. But so that's the first assumption. The second assumption is okay. Let me stay on these numbers. All right, $2 trillion. There's so many places I could go here. $2 trillion in cuts is the base assumption here in this legislation. If you do the math over 10 years, that's $200 billion a year. All right, in cuts. When you look at the deficit we're running, which is the problem, the deficit is the problem. All right, which of course gets back to spending. We're running in FY 2020. Now this was COVID, so take it for what it's worth. $3 trillion deficit. This means that we spent $3 trillion more than we brought in tax revenue. This is where the Treasury Department prints money. And in 2025, they change numbers on an Excel sheet. They don't even print the money. All right. In fiscal year 2023, the deficit was $1.7 trillion. All right. So it went down, got a little better. I hate using the word better here, but it got a little better. In fiscal year 24, the deficit was $1.8 trillion. And then right now, just through April, through 7 months, we're at $1.3 trillion. So we're gonna be at $2 trillion easily by the end of this fiscal year, because we're 7 months in, we're already at 1.3. You do the math on that. My point is $200 billion, best case scenario. $200 billion on a $2-3 trillion deficit is not enough. It's not enough. And what's shocking to me is that we can't find we can't find more money to cut? Our federal government is so big. It's so big. You can't find more than $200 billion a year to cut. I mean, you could cut like some sub-agency, not even an agency. You could cut some sub-agency and save $200 billion. Furthermore, this legislation doesn't truly reform or get rid of these horrendous Obamacare standards that are allowing Medicaid expansion, of which we've talked extensively on this show about. They continue basically the Obamacare model in this legislation. But to me, the deficit is the issue with capital THE. It is the issue. All right. Let's play a couple more clips here. This is Jamie Dimon talking about the bond market. And I'm probably going to interrupt you, Bobby, because this is 3 minutes and I don't have 3 minutes. But let's go ahead and start this clip. This is Jamie Dimon on the risk in the bond market becoming unstable. Let's listen.
These are very large numbers. You've seen it a little bit. You had the crack in the bond market in COVID a little bit. The government did the right stuff, then they massively overdid both spending and QE. We borrowed and spent $10 trillion from 2020 to today. Okay, and you heard the numbers before. We also bought $4 trillion of your securities on top of the $4 trillion we bought in the first go round. Those numbers are true globally, not quite as big as ours, but the QE of us was $8 trillion. The QE of the rest of the world was another $8 trillion or something like that. You're talking about huge sums of money. We don't really know the full effect of that. And the bond dealers, which Gary mentioned, inventories are much smaller than they used to be, partially because of rules and regulations. And you are going to see a crack in the bond market. Okay? It is going to happen. And I tell this to my regulators, some of who are in this room, I'm telling you it's going to happen, and you're going to panic. I'm not going to panic. We'll be fine. We'll probably make more money, and then some of my friends will tell me that we like crises because it's good for J.P. Morgan Chase. Not really. I tell people when Credit Suisse went bankrupt at the First Republic, it was terrible for the banking industry. I think we can make everything better, including that, by just changing and modifying certain rules and regulations, letting market makers intermediate more in the market. But to give you a number, like just J.P. Morgan alone buys and sells $3 trillion a day. And we move $10 trillion a day of money. And we're probably a tenth. So the money moving around the world is $100 trillion a day. The money moving around in the investments, this is stocks, bonds, corporate governments, derivatives, credit, you name it, FX, sovereign debt around the world, 30 trillion. The people who set those long-term rates are those people, including you in the room. It's not the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
They can try to manipulate the long-term rate. They can do what's it called? They do the twist or whatever. It doesn't work for that long. So if you look at economic history, bad things happen. When those tectonic plates shift, it's very hard to see in real time. It is shifting.
All right, so that's Jamie Dimon. And the last point he said there, he's talking about who's buying the debt here. All right, and what he was getting at is that it's you and me. It's the public. And it's other countries that are buying U.S. bonds. And up until now, they've been buying America's debt, right? Other foreign countries and individuals have been buying into U.S. bonds, servicing or basically enabling the debt snowball that we're in. But we can't assume that that's always going to be the case. And we can't assume that people are going to always be giddy about buying U.S. debt. And this gets into our credit rating. This gets into interest rates. But now, who knows if J.P. Dimon's going to be right or not? I don't know. Scott Bessent, we don't have time to play the clip. He disagrees with Jamie Dimon. He thinks he's being apocalyptic. But the point is that there are consequences to sustaining the deficit and debt the trajectory that we're on. That's it. And we have the trifecta. Republicans have the trifecta, and we've got to do better than this. If I had to sum this up in one sentence, that's it. Republicans have the trifecta, both houses of Congress and the White House, this is it, right? This is it. We're in a debt spiral. Inflation is eating our wallets alive, and we can't not do enough. We can't just kind of settle for less here. Status quo, this is just not going to cut it if we're truly about actually fixing this stuff. Now, if we just want to get reelected, that's a whole other conversation. All right, then it's like, yeah, status quo, let's help our buddies, whatever we got to do to get elected. But that shouldn't be what this is about, all right? Let me explain this issue. Let me read something for you as we wrap up here. I thought if you had to sum up this in like a couple paragraphs, here it is. We'll link to this on the show notes. I'll send it over to Bobby. Here, this is from the Cabosi letter. Adam Cabosi runs it. He's an economist and very, very brilliant. And they're making a killing in the stock market because of his predictions and his outfit. But I just follow this on X, and there's a lot of truth here. And it's not a partisan issue. So listen to this. This is what the Cabosi letter put out. The real issue with deficit spending is this. Short-term and long-term incentives in the U.S. political and fiscal system are misaligned. Over the near term, Congress is incentivized to spend more and cut taxes to appeal to constituents for re-election. However, over the long term, this creates a financial conflict of interest, which we are now dealing with as U.S. debt is up $13 trillion in 5 years. In other words, to reduce deficit spending, you must either raise taxes or cut spending, both of which are wildly unpopular for re-election. Over a long enough time frame, this situation results in bankruptcy 100% of the time, which is what Elon Musk has been talking about. The future of America will be determined by this single issue. This outfit ended. That's it. That's it. If we don't reduce spending, we don't survive as a country as we know it. And in order to reduce spending, you have to be an adult, and you can't care about re-election, and you just have to care about doing the right thing. And if I could snap my finger and have one dose of medicine go into the Potomac River in Washington, it would be people up there that simply do the right thing. Don't talk to your lobbyist or your consultant about your campaign that's in 2 years and what you need to do to get reelected. Do the right thing and let the chips fall where they may. That's what got our country where we are today with our founding fathers, and that's the kind of people we need in Washington, D.C.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
The enemy has pulled out all the stops to try to destroy the family for a very long time. That's why the American Family Association stands boldly in the gap to protect and strengthen this God-breathed institution. Visit afa.net today and discover the resources available for you and your family. And if you would, please take a minute to show your support. That's afa.net.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News, I'm Robert Thornton. As talks continue with Iran about a nuclear deal, the government is criticizing the Trump administration's